Hi there. Welcome back to Haunting Vales. Today, we're diving into a chilling tale of mystery, suspense, and ticking danger. This is the Ticking Suitcase, a Hercule Poirot investigation where nothing is what it seems. From the golden halls of the Savoy to the dark secrets hidden beneath Paris. Prepare yourself for one of Poirot's most explosive cases yet. Now sit back, listen closely, and let the mystery unfold. Chapter 1. A Stranger at the Savoy, London, 1936. Fog settled over the city like a shroud of secrecy, blurring lamp posts and swallowing the clang of trolley bells in the mist. Inside the gilded halls of the Savoy Hotel, warm lights pooled on polished marble, and quiet classical music hummed beneath murmured conversation and the clink of fine china. Hercule Poirot sat alone beneath a grand chandelier, his mustache waxed to precision, his dark eyes observant yet calm. A tisane of chamomile rested near his gloved fingers, untouched, as he waited for a man whose telegram had intrigued him not for its detail, but for its disturbing lack of it. Urgent matter. Discretion required. Midnight. The Savoy. Nothing more. The minute hand approached 12 when the doors parted and a tall figure stepped inside. He wore a thick wool overcoat despite the mild chill, and his eyes, darting and sharp, held the exhausted caution of someone who had spent too long looking behind rather than ahead. Poirot stood gently. The man approached, his footsteps rapid and nervous. "Monsieur Poirot?" he asked, his voice low and clipped, touched with a faint Slavic accent. "I am he," Poirot said gently. "You must be Mr.?" The man hesitated. "Kozlov. That is what I go by. Today." Poirot noted the phrasing but did not press. "Then please, Mr. Kozlov, sit. You look as though you have not rested in days." Kozlov sat and placed a battered leather suitcase beside his chair with great care, almost reverence. "Poirot's." I slid down to it. It was old, worn at the corners, but sturdy, military grade by the look of it. Scuffed, reinforced. The kind that had seen borders and bullets. Kozlov leaned forward, lowering his voice until it was barely above the ambient clatter of distant cutlery. "Inside this suitcase," he said, "there is something wrong. It ticks. Faintly. Constantly. Not loudly enough to draw attention, but always, always ticking." Poirot arched a brow. "A bomb, then?" "I do not know," Kozlov said. "It started ticking in Vienna. At first, I thought it was in the walls. A bad pipe. Then on the train, again I heard it. At a cafe in Prague. I opened the case and found nothing unusual. Yet it ticked. I shut it and left. A day later, it was ticking again. I have not dared open it since Munich." Poirot folded his hands, intrigued. "You believe you are being followed?" "I do not believe, Monsieur Poirot. I know. The case is not mine." Poirot blinked. "Not yours. I picked it up by mistake. Or so I thought. At Vienna's Suderler Platz station, there were dozens of bags. All leather. All alike. I took the wrong one. Realized hours later. Returned, but the original was gone. So I kept this one. I meant to report it, but then the ticking started." Poirot glanced again at the suitcase. "And what of the man it belonged to?" Kozlov hesitated. "I believe he is dead." Poirot's expression tightened subtly. "Why come to me?" "Because you are not the police. And I suspect the ticking is not mechanical. It is deliberate. A signal. Or a trap." Poirot leaned closer, inspecting the case without touching it. "Have you attempted to open it?" "Once. In Prague. Nothing out of the ordinary." Then the ticking began again. Faster. As though agitated. Poirot's interest deepened. "And you have not left it unattended since?" "Never. It follows me. Or rather, it stays near. It draws them to me." "Them?" Poirot asked. Kozlov looked up, eyes flicking over his shoulder. "There are people who want what's inside. Not for its value, but for what it represents. Documents. Codes. Names. Or something worse. I do not know. But 3 days ago, A man tried to steal it in broad daylight in Budapest. He said nothing. He simply grabbed it and ran. I followed. When I found him, he had already been killed, strangled, and the case was still there. Poirot straightened, nodding slowly. And since then, silence. Until I arrived in London. This morning, a card was slid under my door at the Clarendon. No name, just one phrase. Time has run out. Poirot stared at the suitcase for a long moment. Then, with a precise movement, he reached into his coat and produced a slim magnifier, running it across the outer lining without contact. There is a faint scuff here, he murmured. Too clean. Recently made. A replacement panel, perhaps. He leaned closer. Do you hear it now? Kozlov nodded. Softly. Only when all else is quiet. Poirot nodded once. Then I suggest we find a quieter room. He rose and motioned for Kozlov to follow. The two made their way to a private suite upstairs, where the ticking was, indeed, more perceptible. Not loud, but steady. A dry, mechanical rhythm like the echo of a heartbeat. Poirot studied the case on the table, then turned to Kozlov. I would like to open it now, but only in your presence. Do I have your permission? Kozlov swallowed hard. You do. Poirot's fingers hovered over the brass clasp. For a moment, time seemed to suspend. Then, click. The latches opened. Slowly, carefully, Poirot lifted the lid. Inside, it was packed with ordinary clothing. A few folded shirts, a shaving kit, a book in check, a pack of cigarettes, and a small, cloth-wrapped item the size of a jewelry box. The ticking grew louder. Poirot reached for the wrapped object. No, Kozlov hissed. But Poirot had already taken it. Unwrapping the cloth revealed a small wooden cube, an ornate box with brass inlays and a single button on top. Poirot held it close to his ear. The ticking was coming from within. What is it? Kozlov whispered. Poirot examined the markings. It's not a bomb, he said slowly. It is a timepiece, but one I have never seen before. And he pressed a groove on the underside. The top popped open slightly. Inside was a sliver of film, wound tight, and a metallic tab with engraved numbers. Coordinates. It's a tracker, Poirot said, eyes narrowing. Not just to follow the suitcase, but to record where it's been. Kozlov paled. Then, they already know we're here. Poirot nodded grimly. Yes, and I suspect they are already in London. A knock sounded at the suite door. Not urgent, not impatient, just calculated. Poirot motioned for silence. He stepped to the peephole, glanced out, then turned. A maid, or someone pretending to be one. Kozlov stepped back, panic rising. Poirot picked up the cube, tucked it into his inner pocket, and turned to the fireplace. Leave the suitcase. We take nothing else. Come. Quietly. They slipped out the side service door and down a back stairwell into the night, disappearing into the thick London fog. The case lay on the table, ticking gently into the silence. Moments later, the suite door creaked open. A man entered, dressed in a Savoy maid's uniform, his eyes scanning the room. When he saw the open suitcase, empty of the cube, his expression darkened. He reached into his pocket, withdrew a thin blade, and with a single swipe, slashed the lining of the suitcase apart. Nothing. He turned and left, just as quietly. Down in the mist, Poirot and Kozlov vanished into the early morning shadows of the city. The game had begun, and the ticking would not stop. Chapter 2. The Man in the Black Coat. London's early morning fog lingered like regret, smearing the edges of buildings and choking the alleys with a damp, uncertain quiet. It was the kind of morning when the city felt half asleep and its secrets more awake than usual. The streets glistened with the residue of night rain, and the occasional cab rattled past with its yellow lamps glowing like faint eyes. Hercule Poirot and Mr. Kozlov walked quickly but not hurriedly, an art Poirot had perfected. They did not speak. In silence, they wound through narrow passageways until they reached a small brick building tucked behind Charing Cross Station. where Poirot kept a private apartment under the name Georges P. Laurent. It had no identifying number, no markings, no unnecessary decorations. Just a thick black door, a rusting brass knob, and windows that hadn't been cleaned in months. It was perfect. Inside, the space was austere but impeccably ordered. Dark wooden furniture, a leather couch, a grandfather clock that no longer ticked, and a desk that had never held anything except paper and precise thoughts. Poirot motioned Kozlov to sit and drew the curtains tightly shut, then turned his attention to the ticking cube, now pulsing faintly from within his coat. He laid it gently on the table, where the sound became more noticeable. Tick, tick, tick. Not loud, not threatening, but undeniably present, like a whisper in a cathedral. Kozlov sat across from him, his fingers wrapped tightly around a warm porcelain cup of black coffee, his knuckles pale and rigid. His eyes, dark and alert, never left the device. "It's not a bomb," Poirot said calmly, sitting down across from him, legs crossed precisely. "It has rhythm. That is not the heartbeat of detonation. That is a signal." "But who built it?" Kozlov asked, voice thin. "That's no ordinary watch." "Swiss," Poirot replied. "Most likely bespoke. Made by hand. But not by any watchmaker who signs his work." This was meant to stay anonymous. "Notice the brass filigree on the seams. See how it's slightly tarnished only around the exposed corners? That means it's been handled recently and often, but only opened once or twice. The polish hasn't faded from the clasp. You believe it holds more than coordinates?" "I do," Poirot said. "I believe it records. And I believe it alerts someone each time it's opened." Kozlov's mouth tightened. "Then they know we've looked inside." Poirot nodded once. "Yes, and I believe they're already watching us." A silence settled between them. Then a sound. Soft, delicate, but clear. A floorboard creaked from the far hallway. Poirot froze. His apartment was single-level. The only second floor was a narrow crawl space accessible by ladder, and he had locked it from the inside before they left. Slowly, Poirot reached beneath the couch and retrieved a small revolver wrapped in a velvet handkerchief. He moved like a man who did not like guns but respected their necessity. Kozlov stood but said nothing. Poirot raised a hand, signaling stillness. Then the creak came again, closer this time. Another step. A faint shift of weight. Poirot moved down the hallway, his footfalls silent, gliding over the carpet. Then, a second sound, the hiss of fabric, as if a rope were rubbing against wood. Poirot tilted his head up. From the ceiling corner, a square panel had shifted. A figure in black was descending by rope, lowering himself with deliberate ease. Poirot raised the revolver and spoke without emotion. "If you come down one more inch, I shall shoot. And I do not miss." The man froze. Then, with silent grace, he dropped to the floor in a crouch, landing with the soft balance of a predator. He was dressed entirely in black, his face pale, clean-shaven, and eerily calm. His dark hair was slicked back tightly. He wore gloves, soft leather, uncreased. "Mr. Poirot," he said, with an accent that defied placement, part London, part something colder. "You are, as always, inconvenient." Poirot did not lower the revolver. "And you, monsieur, are trespassing. State your business." The man stepped forward slowly, his hands raised just enough to show they were empty. "That device," he said, nodding at the cube, "belongs to an organization you do not understand. You should hand it over." Poirot narrowed his eyes. "I do not hand over objects to anonymous men who descend from ceilings." "Who are you?" "I go by many names. None would matter to you. The only thing that should concern you is that your involvement puts you in great danger. That box, what you call a tracker, is not a weapon. It is a vault key, and it was never meant to leave the hands of its original courier." Poirot gestured subtly to Kozlov. "Then why follow him? Why kill for it?" The man's lips barely moved. "Because it unlocks a truth that cannot be spoken in courtrooms or parliaments. And because once opened, It cannot be closed. Poirot studied him. You believe the device leads to a vault beneath St. Cloud? It does, the man said. A place forgotten by mapmakers. Sealed since the war ended. Inside are recordings, names, sealed affidavits. A list of promises broken by the men who stood in the Hall of Mirrors and declared peace while laying the seeds of the next war. Poirot tilted his head. And you wish to protect them? No, the man said coldly. I am tasked to erase them. Then, with a suddenness that betrayed no warning, he lunged, not toward Poirot, but toward Kozlov. In one fluid motion, Poirot fired. The shot cracked through the room, loud and shattering. The bullet missed intentionally, slamming into the wall inches above the man's shoulder. The message was clear. The intruder froze mid-motion, then straightened, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. You'll regret that, he said. Softly. Poirot kept the revolver level. Better men than you have said the same. The man turned and backed toward the window. He has 3 days, he said, nodding toward Kozlov. After that, the vault opens whether you reach it or not. And what it reveals will not save him. It will destroy him. Then, with a swift motion, he smashed the window with his elbow and leapt out into the fog. Poirot ran to the sill and looked down, but there was no body, no sound, no movement. The alley was empty, just mist and the smell of shattered glass. Poirot returned inside, slowly rewrapping the revolver and placing it back beneath the couch. Kozlov exhaled. What did he mean, 3 days? Poirot looked at the ticking cube. I believe the device is timed. Not to detonate, but to reveal. When the countdown ends, something will emerge. A message, a location, perhaps even a voice from the past. Then we must go now, Kozlov said. Poirot nodded. Yes, and we must not go alone. Hours later, under different names and forged papers, they boarded the Calais Express from Victoria Station. Poirot wore a tan trench coat and an English driving cap. Kozlov, now answering to Mr. Smith, wore a gray suit with a red tie and dark glasses, too large for his face. They kept the cube in Poirot's briefcase, secured between medical books and pressed handkerchiefs. The train was busy. Children ran between cabins. A priest snored with his head against the window. A businessman read Le Figaro. But Poirot noticed them all, watched every hand, every step, every shadow. When the tea service arrived, it was a young man with slicked hair and no name badge. Poirot accepted his tea, but said nothing. Kozlov looked around the carriage. You think he's on board? I know he is, Poirot said softly. But not alone. He stared at the opposite carriage mirror. It showed the entire row. But, when the tea boy passed, his reflection had not appeared. Tell me, Kozlov, Poirot said slowly. Do you believe in ghosts? Kozlov blinked. I believe in ghosts of men. The kind that walk while still alive. Poirot nodded. Good. Because I believe we are being followed by one. The train sped through the English countryside, golden fields and twisted fences flashing past. But inside, the air thickened. Not with heat, but with pressure, as though the very carriage strained under the weight of secrets. Poirot closed his eyes. When we reach Paris, he whispered, we go to St. Cloud. And if I am correct, what? We find there will change more than one life. It may change the story of Europe itself. Kozlov stared out the window, his reflection pale and flickering. Behind them, in the last carriage, a man in a black coat sat alone, thumbing a silver pocket watch that did not tick. Chapter 3. Beneath St. Cloud. France welcomed them not with warmth, but with a strange, heavy silence, as if even the land itself sensed what followed them from London, something old, something unfinished, something that didn't want to be found. The sky was overcast as the train slowed near Gare du Nord, and Poirot, ever calm, kept his eyes fixed on the reflection in the train's window, not for the scenery, but to watch the corridor behind him where the man in the black coat still sat 2 carriages away, motionless, never having disembarked during the entire journey. Kozlov was quiet now, worn thin by nerves and unease, his hands buried in his coat pockets, as if holding something he dared not drop. By the time they stepped off the platform, Poirot had already arranged a car under a false name. A Citroën with a tan leather interior and an odometer that had seen too many lies. They drove west, away from the suffocating hum of Paris, toward the quiet village of St. Cloud, where rows of stone homes stood stubbornly against time, and the old woods crept in like memories uninvited. The ticking from the cube had changed, still faint, still persistent, but slower now, like a countdown crawling towards something unspeakable. They reached an abandoned vineyard just past the outskirts of the town, where gnarled vines lay dead, in rows like forgotten soldiers, and the air smelled of damp stone and smoke long extinguished. The vineyard was listed in no registry, and the gate was rusted shut, chained not for security, but for symbolism. No one goes in, and no one comes out. Poirot, ever meticulous, unwrapped the cube and pressed its brass groove again. It clicked, twice, then emitted a soft hiss, like a sigh of resignation. A panel slid out from the side, revealing a new engraving. La Cave, Dick Sept Marches. The cellar. 17 steps, Poirot murmured. They moved toward the main house, a crumbling chateau once belonging to a family long erased from French nobility. Inside, the floor groaned underfoot, dust coated every surface, and spiderwebs trembled like nervous witnesses. In the rear hallway, they found it, an old cellar door half covered by a rotted curtain and nailed shut with crooked boards. Kozlov hesitated, but Poirot did not. With methodical precision, he used a rusted fireplace poker to pry the nails loose one by one, ignoring the creak and snap of aged wood. The door moaned open, revealing a narrow staircase winding downward into darkness, lit only by the slit of gray light above. Poirot led, counting each step aloud. 1, 2, 3, until 17. At the bottom, there was stone. Cold, wet. Ancient stone, worn down by time and secrets. A tunnel stretched ahead, arched with heavy bricks and lined with rusted gas lamps. At the end of the passage stood a vault door, not of medieval make, but modern, cold steel, reinforced with a dial lock and a single square slot, identical in size to the ticking cube. Poirot exhaled slowly. "This is it," he said, his voice hushed. He stepped forward, inserted the cube into the slot. It slid in perfectly. The ticking stopped. Then a mechanical clank echoed through the tunnel. The vault door opened with a long, groaning shudder. Inside was a chamber no larger than a wine cellar, but lined from floor to ceiling with wooden drawers, each labeled in French, German, English, and Russian. On the center pedestal lay a wax-sealed envelope and an old phonograph with a copper horn. Poirot stepped forward and opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph and a typed message in English, to be played only once, to be witnessed by no more than 2, then to be destroyed. The photo was of a group of diplomats, Versailles, 1919, smiling, hands clasped, but one face had been circled in red ink. A man known in certain intelligence circles as Gregor Vashenko, a Soviet envoy presumed dead since 1923. Kozlov recognized him instantly. "That's the man who recruited me," he whispered. "He vanished in Warsaw. No one ever knew why." Poirot placed the phonograph needle gently on the disc. A scratch, then a voice, crisp and smooth, older than the tape, but somehow still alive. "This message," the voice said, "is meant for those who were never supposed to hear it. The war did not end in 1918. It merely changed hands. Beneath the treaties and toasts were contracts, silent alliances, betrayals purchased, with promises of land, and men like me paid to carry out the quiet erasure of those who knew too much. If you are hearing this, then you are standing where I stood. You are near the documents I hid. Do not take them. Do not publish them. The truth will not set anyone free. It will only start another war." Then the record skipped once and stopped. Poirot stared at it. The room was silent. The cube had stopped ticking. Kozlov looked at the drawers, trembling. Do we open them? Poirot hesitated. Not yet. Then something shifted. A distant metallic sound. Another vault. Door, somewhere behind them, had just opened. Poirot turned sharply. We're not alone. They stepped out of the chamber and found the passage no longer empty. The man in the black coat stood at the top of the stairs, holding something in his hand. A flare. He dropped it. It rolled down the steps, hissing red smoke. You were warned. His voice echoed through the tunnel. That vault doesn't belong to history. It belongs to silence. Poirot grabbed Kozlov and darted back into the chamber. The drawers, he said quickly. Pick one. Any one. Kozlov opened the center drawer. Inside, papers. Dozens. Letters. Transcripts. Signatures of men still alive in London, Berlin, Moscow. Poirot scanned one page, then another. If this leaks, governments will collapse. Kozlov grabbed a handful and stuffed them into his coat. Poirot did the same. Outside, the smoke crept closer, and the sound of boots began to echo. More than one man now. More than just the man in black. Poirot turned to Kozlov. There's another way out. There always is. He looked around the chamber walls, tapped. The bricks. Finally, one gave a hollow response. A pressure panel. He pressed it. The wall cracked, then shifted, revealing a narrow stone tunnel behind a false wall. Go, Poirot said. Kozlov hesitated. What about the vault? It will be sealed again, one way or another. They crawled into the escape shaft. They smoked close now, curling like fingers around their heels. Behind them, the vault door began to close automatically, and just before it did, Poirot hurled the cube back inside. As the steel slammed shut, the ticking returned faintly, muffled and far away. They emerged hours later in the ruins of a chapel half buried in the woods behind the estate. Mud-covered, coughing, alive. Poirot stood, brushing moss from his coat. The world doesn't know what nearly happened today, he said. Kozlov looked at the papers. Should we show them? Poirot stared into the forest. Only the right people. The truth, Monsieur Kozlov, is not always the cure. Sometimes it is the poison. But even as he said it, they both knew. The ticking had not truly stopped. It had only paused, waiting for the next hand to wind it again. Chapter 4. The Silence Before the Blast. The morning London woke up, it did so with a curious stillness. The city, forever buzzing, seemed to pause as though it too sensed that something inevitable had begun to unravel. A fine mist curled against windows and lampposts, swallowing sound and blurring shapes. In the elegant drawing room of the townhouse Poirot had borrowed near St. James's Park, the ticking was louder than ever. Not the suitcase, but the clock above the fireplace, its rhythmic tock-tock slicing the air with surgical precision. Poirot sat in silence, hands steepled, eyes closed. He had not slept. Not really. Neither had Inspector Japp, who paced along the bookshelf with a frown as permanent as his mustache. The suitcase, now secured within a reinforced metal trunk brought over from Scotland Yard, sat untouched at the center of the room. No wires protruded, no blinking lights, only the ticking, constant, controlled, designed. The question, Poirot said finally, voiced like a whisper breaking glass, is not who built it, nor even why, but who wanted it to be found here, and what message it carries. Japp scoffed, running his fingers along the spine of a leather-bound atlas. It's a bomb, Poirot. The message is destruction, death. Poirot opened his eyes, calm as still water. Non, death is too easy. This is art. This is theater. At that precise moment, the door creaked open, revealing Miss Lemon, face pale, holding a letter. This came, delivered by hand. No return address. Poirot took it, studying the envelope. Heavy, cream-colored paper. The kind used by diplomats. Or assassins. Inside, a single typed message. By the time you read this, The fuse will already have burned halfway. Yours, with precision. Not signed, Miss Lemon murmured. Oh, but it is, Poirot corrected. Signed with arrogance. Jap walked over. We need to evacuate the block. Call the bomb squad back in. This isn't a game. But Poirot raised a hand. To remove it now would be to trigger exactly what they want. Chaos. A spectacle. No, this was always meant to tick in silence. The fear, you see, is the weapon. Jap shook his head. What kind of madman builds a bomb just to scare people? Poirot gave a half smile. One who knows that silence is often louder than an explosion. There was history to this kind of terror. He remembered the anarchists of Belgium, how they planted fake explosives in Royal Mail to prove a point. The ticking, the fear, the response, it was performance. And Poirot knew, in his gut, that this was cut from the same cloth. Just then, a second envelope was found, slipped through the back kitchen door. Inside, a small brass gear and a coded phrase, time bends only. For the one who builds it. Poirot stood. He's watching. Somewhere nearby. He wants to see how we behave. Jap growled. Then let's give him a show. We drag that thing out, drop it in the Thames. But Poirot, ever the strategist, shook his head. No, we do. Something better. We invite him closer. And so, the bait was set. The newspapers were tipped off about an artifact of high value under watch by Scotland Yard. The suitcase, now surrounded by reinforced steel and police cordon, sat like an idol in a temple. Crowds gathered at a distance. Officials whispered in circles. Reporters speculated. Meanwhile, Poirot prepared a far more delicate trap, not of wire and powder, but of psychology. That night, as darkness reclaimed the city, Poirot slipped out of the townhouse alone. No police escort, no fanfare. Only the ticking suitcase remained behind, unmoved. Jap protested furiously, but Poirot insisted. He will only come if he believes the game is still his. And he did. At precisely 3 minutes past 2 in the morning, a shadow crept through the alleyway near the townhouse. A man in a bowler hat, gloves, and dark coat. He moved like a technician, precise, unfaltering. He carried a leather case, slimmer than Kozlov's. No hesitation, no fear. He bypassed the back entrance and entered through the pantry door left ajar. But inside the drawing room, the scene had changed. The suitcase was gone. In its place stood Hercule Poirot. Bonsoir, he said quietly. The man froze. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. Poirot stepped forward. I knew you would come, monsieur. And I also know you will not detonate a thing. Because the only thing you ever wanted was control. The man, silent, calculating, looked past Poirot to the empty trunk. His lips trembled. You moved it? He asked. Non, Poirot replied. I disarmed it. The man lunged forward in desperation, but 2 officers hidden in the dark stepped in. He was tackled, handcuffed, and revealed under the lights as Victor Delacourt, a former Swiss clockmaker turned political radical. The suitcase, Poirot later explained, had been a mechanical bluff, a masterful construction of ticking gears and rotating brass, not explosive, but terrifying. A decoy that mimicked danger, built to travel through hands, cross borders, and incite panic. But why? Jap asked, holding the brass gear from the envelope. Poirot answered, because power, my friend, is not always in the bang. Sometimes it's in the silence before it. The fear, the guessing. That's what he wanted. He turned time into terror. As dawn broke over London and the fog began to lift, Poirot looked out over the city. Calm, elegant, and unshaken. The ticking had stopped, and in its place, only silence remained. Chapter 5. The Final Detonation. The morning sun filtered weakly through the drapes of the old Chelsea townhouse, bathing the remnants of the night's chaos in a golden haze that felt almost mocking. Hercule Poirot stood by the window, a solitary silhouette framed against the rising light. Behind him, Chief Inspector Hawthorne paced slowly, the remnants of disbelief still etched across his face. On the low table sat the now infamous suitcase, harmless in appearance, yet responsible for a chain of events so delicately orchestrated that one missed step could have rewritten the city's skyline. But the true explosion, Poirot insisted, had already happened. Not one of fire and destruction, he had said, but of intention, of manipulation, of fear. When Poirot finally turned, the calm in his expression had hardened into precision. He motioned to Hawthorne and the others to sit. It was time to reveal everything. It was never about the suitcase itself, Poirot began, folding his hands in that trademark, patient manner. No, the suitcase was a decoy. The real weapon was uncertainty. And uncertainty, MES Amos, is often more powerful than a stick of dynamite. The room went still, every breath held. He explained how Gerald Ashcombe, the recently deceased diplomat whose luggage was rerouted, had been unknowingly used as a pawn in a wider conspiracy. A shipment mix-up? Nonsense. Poirot had traced it back to an unassuming clerk in the French consulate with suspicious transfers, one who had conveniently vanished days before the suitcase appeared. Poirot's voice was calm but precise, building a slow rhythm. You see, the true mastermind orchestrated this with surgical precision. The bomb's presence was irrelevant. Its suggestion, le threat, was the true key. The panic, the movement of people, the heightened surveillance, it created noise. And in that noise, something else moved. Something else indeed. While security forces had been diverted to the suitcase, an entirely different event occurred in the shadows. A data extraction operation within a confidential wing of the Ministry of Defense. They created a ghost bomb, Poirot said, to hide a very real theft. And the mysterious Dr. Renata Feld, the nervous academic who had triggered this entire affair, had unwittingly transported more than just a suspicious suitcase. She had also carried state secrets disguised in academic diagrams and coded mathematical formulas that were swapped while she panicked, lost in her own paranoia. Brilliant, Hawthorne muttered under his breath. Poirot raised an eyebrow. And utterly despicable. People's lives were risked, their minds manipulated, all to buy 15 minutes of darkness. The explosion that was feared never came, but a different kind of detonation had occurred, a psychological one. Poirot detailed how the mastermind behind the operation had leveraged the predictable responses of law enforcement, the media, and even his own involvement. He counted on me being drawn in, Poirot admitted with rare humility. He built a story that I could not resist. He knew I would solve it, and in doing so, clear the way for his accomplice to move unnoticed. The suitcase, Poirot revealed, was built with enough intricacy to be real, but enough ambiguity to be doubted. Because a bomb that you are not sure exists, he said, is far more terrifying than one you know is there. It was, in essence, a masterstroke of psychological terrorism, designed not to harm physically, but to destabilize, to distract, to shake the pillars of security so something could slither through the cracks. Poirot moved to the tableware. The suitcase now sat open, harmless, the internal mechanism frozen like a fossil of tension. He gazed down at it with a strange, almost fatherly expression. You, mon ami, he whispered, were never meant to explode, only to echo. In the days that followed, arrests were made. The clerk was found in Prague. Files were recovered, though not all. The media frenzy died down with a hunger that had been barely fed. And as London's tension finally began to breathe again, Poirot, alone in his apartment, dusted his already immaculate windowsill, the ticking of his desk clock the only sound in the room. It had always been about timing, he thought. Not the timing of a bomb, the timing of distraction, of intervention, of human response. And that, in the end, was where the Real story lived, not in explosions, but in choices made just moments before they might have changed everything. As Poirot reached to adjust the hands of the clock, more a habit than necessity, He smiled faintly. The detonation, he murmured, was never in the suitcase. It was in us. And as the camera would fade on that moment, the audience, watching, would feel the unsettling truth settle in. Not every bomb has to go off to leave a scar. If you enjoyed this Hercule Poirot mystery and want to unravel more cases with the same intensity, detail, and slow-burning brilliance, don't forget to like this video, share it with fellow mystery lovers, and subscribe for more professionally crafted, immersive detective stories. Each case gets darker, each twist sharper, and trust us, you don't want to miss what's next.